Every month for nearly 14 years, my husband wired money to his ailing sister. Not once did I suspect a thing, not until the day I actually met her. The discovery I made that day would forever alter the course of my life. Good morning, everyone. My name is Teresa, and I'm 76 years old. Today, I'm going to share a story from my life, one that I've kept bottled up for what feels like forever. Before I get started, if you're just now tuning in, please give this video a thumbs up. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It really helps me keep sharing my stories with all of you. So, let's rewind back to 1965. I was only 16 when I first laid eyes on Arnold. He was a handsome, hard-working young man, and he had a promising future as a truck driver. Back in those days, being a trucker was a pretty respectable profession. You know, the pay was decent, and I, a simple girl from the suburbs of Chicago, just the daughter of farmers who'd moved to the city seeking a better life, saw in him an opportunity to build a family of my own. We tied the knot after dating for only 6 months. My mother thought it was way too fast. She said I barely knew the guy, but that's just how things were back then. You fell head over heels and got married in a heartbeat. It wasn't like today, where couples shack up together first to see if they're even compatible. Back then, we got married in church, with a veil and a gown, asking for God's blessing for a marriage that we hoped would last an eternity. Our early days were tough, as they are for most young couples just starting out. We lived in a cramped bedroom and kitchen in the back of his aunt's house. Arnold traveled constantly, driving the route between Chicago, Indianapolis, and New York. Sometimes he'd be gone for 3 or 4 days at a stretch. I understood it was part of his job. He'd always say, "Teresa, it's all for you and the family we're going to build that I drive across this country." Soon enough, our first child, Charles Edward, came into the world. 2 years later, Mary Elizabeth arrived. And then, 3 years after that, Joseph Andrew joined the family. 3 kids to raise, can you even believe it? And there I was, constantly juggling diapers, bottles, and household chores, while Arnold continued to spend most of his time out on the road. It was around our 2nd year of marriage that he first told me about his sister, Celia. According to Arnold, she lived in Indianapolis and was plagued by health problems. He never went into specifics about her illness, just said it was serious and that she required constant care. Every month, without fail, he would set aside a considerable chunk of his salary to send to her. "Teresa, she's my only sister. Our parents are gone. We only have each other. I can't just abandon her," he'd tell me, those pleading brown eyes of his convincing me of anything. And I, naive as I was, believed every word he said. I even thought it was admirable, that brotherly love, that unwavering concern. There were many times when money was tight at home, when we couldn't afford school supplies for the kids, or when Charles Edward's sneakers had gaping holes in them. I would glance at the envelope Arnold had set aside for Celia and feel a sharp pang of guilt in my heart. But I never, ever questioned it. She was his family. I respected that. The years flew by. Our life remained simple but stable. We lived in a modest 2-story house in the suburbs. The children attended public school. I took in laundry to help make ends meet, but we never went hungry. Arnold earned a reasonably good living as a truck driver, even though a significant portion of his earnings went to this Celia. Something I found a bit odd, but didn't dwell on too much, was the fact that we never actually visited this sister-in-law. During holidays, birthdays, there was never an invitation to meet her. Whenever I suggested it, Arnold always skillfully changed the subject. He claimed she was very private, didn't like visitors, and that her home environment needed to be strictly controlled because of her illness. "One day we will, Teresa, but now is simply not a good time," he always answered. And I, having been raised to be a good wife, not to question my husband's decisions, accepted it without argument. Today, I often wonder how I could have been so blind, so incredibly naive. But in those days, that's just how it was. Women accepted things, stayed quiet, and placed their unwavering trust in their husbands. The routine was always the same. Arnold would leave for his trips, come home for a few days, and then take off again. When he said he was heading to New York, the trips would last longer, usually a whole week. It's farther away, Teresa, and the New York loads always pay more, he explained. And it all made perfect sense to me. It was in 1978, after we'd been married for 13 years, that things began to unravel. Our children were growing up fast. Charles Edward was 12, Mary Elizabeth was 10, and Joseph Andrew was 7. I had managed to land a job as a sewing assistant in a small clothing factory near our home. I didn't earn much, but it helped with the bills, and I actually enjoyed the work. I'd always had a knack for sewing, having learned it from my mother when I was just a little girl. That March of 1978, I remember it like it was yesterday. I was laying out Arnold's things for yet another trip to New York. Just as I always did, I washed and ironed his shirts, sorted his socks, and checked to see if any buttons were missing from his uniform. It was a routine I had faithfully followed for years. I picked up his coat, that navy blue coat he always wore on his trips, to check if it needed any mending. That's when I felt something in the inside pocket. I reached in and pulled out a homemade birthday card decorated with colorful polka dots. I opened the card and read, "Happy birthday, my love. May God grant you many more years of life and health to continue being the wonderful father and husband you are. With all our love, Celia and Deborah." My heart skipped a beat. I read those words over and over, desperately trying to find some logical explanation. Father, husband. Who was Deborah? And why was his supposedly sick sister calling him my love and husband? Arnold's birthday had been in February, a month prior. I had baked a simple cake, bought a small gift, a new wallet since his old one was falling apart. He barely touched the cake, claiming he was exhausted from his trip, and thanked me for the gift without any real enthusiasm. Now I finally understood that cold reaction. He had probably already celebrated with them, whoever they were. With trembling hands, I slipped the card into my apron pocket. I didn't confront Arnold at that moment. Something deep inside me told me I needed more proof, needed to better understand what was going on before making any accusations. Arnold left for another trip to New York the very next day, completely unaware that I had found the card. He kissed me on the forehead as he always did, hugged the children, and promised to bring each of them a chocolate bar when he returned. The scene was so familiar, so incredibly normal. But now, a dark shadow hung over it, a seed of doubt rapidly growing inside me. In the days that followed, I became hyper-vigilant, alert to any detail, any clue that might help me make sense of what was happening. I didn't confide in anyone, not even my best friend Louise, who lived right next door. It was a pain, a deep suspicion that I kept locked up inside myself. It was on a Thursday of that week that I received a phone call that would change everything. The phone rang around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Back then, owning a telephone was a rarity in most homes. We had managed to have one installed just a few months earlier, and it was a source of pride in the neighborhood. "Hello. Good afternoon. This is Star Road Trucking Company. May I speak with Mr. Arnold? He's not here. He's out on a trip. I'm his wife, Teresa. Mrs. Teresa, we need to speak with him urgently. We have a load for New York that needs to leave today." The driver who was supposed to take it had a problem, and we thought of Arnold. "But he's already in New York," I said, completely bewildered. "He left Monday morning and should be back soon." There was silence on the other end of the line. "In New York? That's impossible, ma'am. The load he was supposed to take only became available last night. He didn't leave for New York this week." I felt as if the ground was giving way beneath my feet. My voice trembled as I responded. There must be some mistake. My husband left for New York on Monday. He's worked for you for over 15 years. Ma'am, we know. That's precisely why we're calling him. But he didn't pick up any load for New York this week. Perhaps you're confused. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking uncontrollably. No, I wasn't confused. Arnold had clearly told me he was going to New York. He had kissed me on the forehead, hugged the children, and left with his travel bag. Where had he really gone? The doubt continued to grow inside me, like a malignant tumor. That same week, while searching for the children's documents for school re-enrollment, I opened the drawer where Arnold kept his important papers. At the very bottom of the drawer, hidden beneath various documents, I discovered a checkbook from a different bank than ours, along with an envelope bearing Celia's name and an address in Indianapolis. I scribbled the address on a piece of paper and tucked it behind the photo in our wedding portrait. The irony was not lost on me. Hiding the evidence of my husband's possible betrayal alongside the cherished memory of the day we vowed fidelity to each other before God. The days that followed were filled with agonizing uncertainty. I desperately needed to know the truth, but I was terrified of what I might uncover. What if Arnold had another family? What if that Deborah mentioned in the card was his daughter? How would I possibly cope with such a devastating reality, with 3 children to raise and very little professional experience? But I've always been a woman of inner strength, even when I might have appeared fragile on the outside. I made up my mind that I would travel to Indianapolis, to that address, to finally discover who Celia really was and what she meant in my husband's life. I waited until Arnold's next supposed trip to New York, which happened 2 weeks later. On Friday, as soon as he left, I took the children to my friend Louisa's house. I need to take care of some business in Indianapolis, I told her, without divulging any details. I'll be back tomorrow night. Could you watch the children for me? Louise, always so willing to help, agreed without asking too many questions. She must have sensed something strange in my behavior over the past few days, but she respected my silence. I gathered my savings, money I kept hidden in the hot chocolate tin at the back of the kitchen cabinet. It wasn't much, but it would cover the round-trip bus fare to Indianapolis and leave a little extra for emergencies. I slipped the birthday card into my purse. It was the only concrete piece of evidence I possessed. I put on my best dress, a light blue one with small flowers that I had sewn myself. I carefully combed my hair and applied a subtle touch of lipstick. I wanted to look presentable when facing whatever I might find at that address in Indianapolis. I caught the bus at the station early in the morning. The trip to Indianapolis took about 3 hours, but to me, it felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding so loudly that I was convinced the other passengers could hear it. What would I find when I arrived? Was I about to discover that my entire married life had been based on a lie? Or would there be a reasonable explanation for all of this, and I would return home relieved, laughing at my overactive imagination? When I finally got off the bus in Indianapolis, I boarded another city bus that would take me to the neighborhood indicated in the address. It was a lovely neighborhood, clearly more affluent than my own. The houses were larger, the gardens were meticulously maintained, and the streets were cleaner. I finally reached the address. It was a corner house painted in a cheerful light yellow, with a beautiful garden in the front and a small shop attached to the garage. A discreet sign announced, "Celia's Atelier, Custom Clothing." I took a deep breath and opened the gate. The sound of the doorbell made my heart leap. I was about to uncover the truth that would forever change my life. I stepped into the small atelier, desperately trying to control the trembling in my hands. The shop was absolutely beautiful, impeccably organized, with various clothing items displayed on racks and mannequins. Colorful fabrics were neatly arranged on shelves, far more luxurious than the scraps I used for my sewing at home. It was a welcoming, feminine environment that, under different circumstances, I would have admired. But at that moment, every detail only amplified my mounting anguish. A young girl appeared from the back of the shop. She must have been about 14 years old, with long brown hair tied in a braid, and eyes. My God, those eyes were the spitting image of my Charles Edward, identical to Arnold's. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I help you?" she asked with a friendly smile. I stood there, paralyzed for a few seconds, meticulously observing every detail of that young face. The shape of her nose, the slightly square chin, even the way she smiled with her head tilted ever so slightly to the side. Everything about her reminded me of Arnold. "I'm looking for Celia," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. "My mom went out to buy some materials, but my dad is home." "Would you like to speak with him?" My dad? Those two simple words confirmed what my heart had already suspected. Deborah, she was the girl from the birthday card, my husband's daughter with another woman. "Yes, please," I replied automatically, even though I was completely unprepared for what was about to happen next. "Dad, there's a customer here looking for you," she shouted toward the back of the house. The seconds that followed felt like an eternity. I heard footsteps approaching, and then there, standing in the doorway that separated the shop from the residence, was Arnold, my husband, the man who, at that very moment, should have been driving a truck to New York. Our eyes met, and I watched as the color drained completely from his face. His eyes widened in absolute terror. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if he had seen a ghost, and perhaps, in a way, that's exactly what it was. The ghost of the life he had constructed with lies finally coming to collect its dues. "Teresa," he murmured so softly that I almost didn't hear him. The girl looked from him to me, completely confused. "You know each other?" Before either of us could answer, a woman walked in through the front door, carrying several bags. She was a strikingly pretty woman, about my age. Her hair was perfectly styled, she wore bright red lipstick, and she was dressed in an elegant dress that undoubtedly cost more than all of my clothes combined. "I'm back, honey. I found that fabric Mrs. Wilson wanted for the wedding dress." She stopped short when she saw me. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize we had a customer." "Celia," Arnold stammered, his voice choked with emotion. "This is Teresa." She looked at me, initially without any comprehension, then slowly her expression changed. First confusion, then surprise, and finally, the same look of utter horror I had witnessed on Arnold's face. "Teresa, you're..." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. She knew exactly who I was. With trembling hands, I pulled the card from my purse and held it up. "I found this in his coat." Celia dropped the bags onto the floor with a loud thud. Deborah looked at all of us, utterly bewildered, desperately trying to understand what was happening. "Mom, Dad, who is she?" "Deborah, sweetie, go to your room," Celia said, her voice trembling. But the girl remained rooted to the spot. "No, she has the right to know," I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "After all, she's also a victim in this whole mess." I turned to the young girl, whose eyes were now filled with fear and confusion. "My name is Teresa. I've been married to your father for 13 years. We have 3 children together." The girl's face contorted in shock and disbelief. She looked at her father, then at her mother, desperately searching for some denial, some sign that what I was saying was a lie. But their silence confirmed everything. "It's not true, is it, Dad?" she pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. "Tell me it's not true." Arnold appeared to have aged 10 years in those few short minutes. He ran a trembling hand over his face, a familiar gesture I knew so well. He always did it when he was feeling cornered. "Deborah, I can explain." "Explain what?" Celia interrupted, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "That you have another family? That everything you've told us all these years has been nothing but a pack of lies? I sank down into a nearby chair. My legs could no longer support my weight. The shop, which just moments before had seemed so cozy and inviting, now felt suffocating. I glanced around the room and noticed the photographs hanging on the wall. Arnold embracing Celia and Deborah, smiling in pictures from outings, birthdays, family moments that had been stolen from me and my children. "How long?" I asked, looking directly at Arnold. "Since when have you been maintaining this double life?" He lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. "I met Celia in 1963, before you, Teresa. When Celia got pregnant in 1964, I was already dating you. I didn't know what to do. So, you decided to marry me and maintain two separate families?" My voice came out louder than I had intended. "For 14 years, Arnold, 14 years of lies." Celia approached me, her eyes now brimming with tears. "He told me he was a widower when Deborah was born, that he couldn't officially marry me because of his first wife's pension. I believed him, Teresa." Deborah, leaning against the wall, sobbed silently. My heart ached for her. That innocent girl, born into the midst of so many lies. "And the money?" I asked, turning my attention back to Arnold. "The money you claimed you were sending to your sick sister every month?" He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. It was painfully obvious. The money that could have given my children a better life, that could have paid for extracurricular activities, new clothes, or dental treatment for Mary Elizabeth, was being used to support this other family, this beautiful house, this shop. "Do you have children?" Celia suddenly asked, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand, smudging her red lipstick. "3, I answered. "Charles Edward, 12, Mary Elizabeth, 10, and Joseph Andrew, 7. And I hesitated for a moment, my hand instinctively going to my belly. "I just found out I'm expecting our 4th. Arnold's head snapped up, shock evident on his face. He hadn't known. I had only confirmed it the week before, but with everything that had been going on, I hadn't found the right moment to tell him. "What cruel irony. Pregnant," he murmured, his face as pale as a sheet. "Yes, Arnold, we're having another child. Another child you will abandon half the time to live your other life." Celia sat down heavily, looking as devastated as I felt. "How could you, Arnold? How could you do this to us, to Deborah, to her children?" She gestured towards me, her voice choked with tears. "We were two families waiting for you, believing in you, loving you." Arnold looked like a trapped animal. He glanced from one of us to the other, searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, he uttered the only thing he probably thought could salvage the situation. "I love you both. I love both families. Please try to understand. I didn't want to hurt anyone." A wave of anger washed over me. "Didn't want to hurt anyone? And what are you doing now, Arnold? What have you been doing all these years? Every time you left home, claiming you were going to work to provide us with a better life, you were coming here. Every time you said you were in New York, you were here with them. Every penny that could have gone towards our children's education, to improving our home, to giving them the things we never had, you spent here." I looked around the house, so much more comfortable and well-appointed than the small two-story house where I raised my children. "Look at this place, Arnold. Look at the difference. While I took in laundry to supplement our income, you set up this shop for her." Celia seemed to be realizing something for the first time. "You said you took in laundry?" "Arnold told me you were a teacher, that you had a good salary, that you didn't need any financial assistance." I laughed bitterly. "Teacher? I barely finished elementary school, Celia. I work as a sewing assistant in a clothing factory and do laundry in my spare time. We live in a small two-story house in the suburbs of Chicago. Our children have never owned an expensive toy, never gone on a real vacation." Turning back to Arnold, I continued, That's why you always resisted when I suggested we save for the children's education. That's why you always changed the subject when I talked about renovating the house. The money already had a predetermined destination, didn't it? Deborah, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke, her voice cracking with sobs. I have siblings, and I never even knew it? The question, so innocent and yet so filled with pain, broke something deep inside me. I approached her slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a frightened animal. Yes, Deborah, you have 3 siblings. Charles Edward looks a lot like you. Has the same eyes. Mary Elizabeth is quiet, like you seem to be. And Joseph Andrew is a bit of a rambunctious one. But I'm sure they'd all love to get to know you. I could see the wheels turning in Deborah's head. She was trying to process everything, trying to reconcile the image she had of her father with the reality that was now unfolding before her eyes. I glanced at Celia, who was staring at Arnold with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. The air in the room was thick with betrayal, anger, and heartbreak. I knew that my life would never be the same. The foundation upon which I had built my marriage, my family, had just crumbled before my eyes. And yet, amidst the pain and confusion, there was also a strange sense of liberation. The truth, however painful, had finally set me free. I stood up, my legs still a bit shaky, and looked at Arnold one last time. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel hatred, I just felt an overwhelming sense of disappointment. You were a coward, Arnold. A coward who couldn't face the consequences of his actions. A coward who chose to live a lie rather than tell the truth. I turned to Celia and Deborah and offered them a small, sad smile. I'm so sorry that you had to find out this way. You both deserved better than this. And with that, I walked out of Celia's atelier, leaving behind the shattered pieces of my past and stepping into the unknown future that awaited me. The bus ride back to Chicago was a blur. I stared out the window, watching the scenery pass by, but I didn't really see anything. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. I thought about my children, about how I was going to explain all of this to them. I thought about the new baby, about how I was going to raise another child on my own. But despite the challenges that lay ahead, I knew that I would be okay. I was a strong woman, and I had survived worse things in my life. I would find a way to pick up the pieces and build a new life for myself and my children. When I arrived back at Louise's house, the children were already asleep. I thanked her for taking care of them and tucked them into bed. As I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held. But one thing was certain. I was no longer Teresa, the naive young wife who blindly trusted her husband. I was a survivor, a warrior, and I was ready to face whatever came my way. The next morning, I sat down with my children and told them the truth about their father. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew that they deserved to know. They were angry, they were hurt, but they were also incredibly supportive. They rallied around me, offering me their love and comfort. And in that moment, I knew that we would get through this together. We were a family, and nothing, not even Arnold's betrayal, could ever change that. Life wasn't always easy, but we learned to lean on each other, to support each other, and to never give up. And in the end, that's what really mattered. We were survivors, and we had each other. And that was enough. So, that's my story. The story of how I discovered my husband's double life and how it changed my life forever. It was a painful experience, but it also taught me a lot about myself and about the strength that I never knew I possessed. I hope that by sharing my story, I can inspire others to never give up, to always believe in themselves, and to never let anyone take away their power. Thank you for listening. He may have been a small man, but his heart was enormous. They were completely unaware of your existence, just as you were unaware of theirs. Tears flowed freely down the young woman's cheeks. So, what now? What happens from here? That question had been echoing in my head from the second I laid eyes on that birthday card. What was going to happen now? How could I possibly go on with my life, knowing that everything I had based it on was a complete fabrication? Arnold, maybe sensing the situation slipping from his grasp, made an attempt to come closer. Teresa, let's just talk this out. Let's see if we can work through this. We don't have to make any decisions we'll regret. I took a step back, instinctively pulling away from his touch. Don't you dare touch me. I don't want to hear another word of your lies. Celia, who had been quiet up to this point, suddenly rose to her feet. You stayed at my place last night. You said you were going to be here until Sunday. That you wouldn't be back in Chicago until Monday. That you were planning on taking Deborah to the movies tomorrow. She looked at me, a dawning awareness spreading across her face. When he was with you, he told you he was on a business trip to New York, right? And when he was with me, he led you to believe he was working. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of kinship with this woman who, until a few minutes ago, had been nothing more than a name to me. A supposedly ailing sister. He actually told you I was his sister? She asked in disbelief. Yes, his sick sister who needed constant financial help. That's the story he spun to justify the money he sent every month. Celia shook her head, letting out a laugh that was bitter and humorless. And he told me he had a nephew with problems, the son of a brother who lived upstate, and that he was helping him out financially with his medical treatments. We looked at each other, two women who had been deceived by the same man, two lives that had been constructed on a house of cards. In that instant, I felt more connected to Celia than I did to the man I had shared my bed with for the last 13 years. Arnold started to speak again, trying to explain, trying to make excuses for the inexcusable, but his words just rang hollow, empty of any real meaning. He talked about love, about not wanting to cause anyone pain, about how things had somehow gotten away from him. As he talked, a firm decision began to form within me. I had no idea what my life was going to look like from that moment forward, how I was going to manage to raise 4 kids on my own, how I was going to deal with the judgmental eyes of society as a woman alone in the 70s, trying to navigate the complexities of separation. But one thing I knew, deep down in my soul, was that I could not stay married to a man who had built his life on a mountain of lies. Arnold, I cut him off in the middle of his excuses. I don't want to hear another word out of you. I'm taking the bus back to Chicago right now. When you get back home, I want you to pack up all your stuff and get out. I don't want you anywhere near me or my kids. Teresa, please, let's just talk this over calmly. There's absolutely nothing left to discuss. You've completely destroyed our family. You lied to me, to our children, to asterisk them. I gestured towards Celia and Deborah. There's no going back from this. I turned to leave, but I paused for one last look at Celia and Deborah. I'm so incredibly sorry that you had to experience any of this. You didn't deserve any of it. Leaving the shop, I stepped out onto the sunny street in Indianapolis. Despite the ache in my heart, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The truth, as painful as it was also setting me free. On the bus ride back to Chicago, as silent tears ran down my face, I started to plan out my next steps. How was I going to break this news to my children? How was I going to manage financially? How was I going to put the pieces of my life back together after Arnold had shattered them? I had no idea what the future held, but I knew that that day in Indianapolis marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new one. A life without deceit and betrayal. A life that, however uncertain, would be truly my own. That bus ride home was one of the most difficult things I have ever done. As we made our way from Indianapolis to Chicago, I stared out the window, but I wasn't really seeing the scenery passing by. My mind was a jumbled mess of thoughts and emotions. How was I going to tell the children? What was I going to say to the neighbors? How were we going to make ends meet, By the time I arrived home, it was already dark. I picked up the kids from Louisa's house, and she immediately knew that something was wrong. My puffy eyes and the look of despair on my face must have given me away. "Did something happen, Teresa?" she asked softly, while the children played in the living room. "We'll talk later," was all I could manage to say. I took the children home and tried my best to act normal, but Charles Edward, who was always so observant, noticed that I wasn't myself. "Mom, are you sick?" he asked, his eyes, which looked so much like Deborah's now that I knew the truth, filled with concern. "No, honey, I'm just a little tired from the trip," I replied, forcing a smile. I put the children to bed early that night, barely able to concentrate on the story I was telling. As soon as I closed their bedroom door, I collapsed onto the living room sofa and cried harder than I ever had before. I cried for myself, for my children, and even for Celia and Deborah. All of us were victims of Arnold's tangled web of lies. Arnold was supposed to be back from his trip to New York on Sunday. All day long, I mentally practiced what I was going to say to him, how I was going to demand that he leave the house. But Sunday came and went, and so did Monday. He didn't show up. On Tuesday, with the children starting to ask about their father incessantly, I received a phone call from the trucking company. Arnold had quit his job. He hadn't offered any explanation. He just left a letter of resignation and disappeared. That's when it finally dawned on me that he wasn't coming back. He didn't have the guts to face the consequences of his actions. He was abandoning me and the children, just as he had probably abandoned Celia and Deborah. The days that followed were filled with sheer desperation. Our savings were very little, barely enough to cover our expenses for a month. My salary as a sewing assistant wouldn't even come close to being able to support a household with 4 children. 3 children already here and 1 more on the way. It was at that moment that sewing, a skill that I had learned from my mother as a child, became my lifeline. I started to take on small repair and alteration jobs in the neighborhood, placing ads in local markets, and offering my services at the school when I went to pick up the children. At first, the income I made was so small that it barely made a dent in our budget. But slowly, my clientele started to grow. People started to seek me out, not just for repairs, but to have new clothes, curtains, and tablecloths made. My work was meticulous, and my prices were fair. Before long, the living room of our little house had turned into a makeshift atelier, filled with fabric scraps, thread, and a used sewing machine that I had purchased. Meanwhile, my belly grew bigger, and so did the gossip in the neighborhood. In the 70s, a single, pregnant woman raising 3 kids was like a magnet for comments and disapproving looks. I made up a story about Arnold finding a better job in another state and that we would be moving there soon. It was easier than telling the truth, than exposing my children to the shame of having a father who had been living a double life. I will never forget the day that I received that unexpected phone call. It was Celia. "Teresa, this is Celia from Indianapolis." My heart leapt into my throat. What did she want? Did she have news about Arnold? Had he gone back to her? "Has Arnold returned there?" she asked, her voice strained. "No," I replied. "He hasn't come back. He quit his job at the trucking company and vanished." There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. "Here, too. He disappeared without a trace. He only left a letter asking for forgiveness, saying that he didn't deserve either of us." I can't even begin to describe the mix of emotions that I was feeling at that moment. Anger, of course, at him for abandoning his children, but also a strange sense of relief at not having to face him, at not having to hear any more of his lies. "How are you?" Celia asked, surprising me with the genuine concern in her voice. "Surviving," I replied honestly. "And you and Deborah?" "Surviving, too. The shop is keeping us afloat, at least." There was another pause, and then she continued. "Teresa, if you find out where he is, let me know." Not for me, but for Deborah. She needs answers. Of course, I promised. And if you learn anything, let me know, too. My children also deserve to know. We hung up the phone with a strange sense of camaraderie. We were two women who had been abandoned by the same man. Two mothers trying to protect their children from the pain of rejection. In August of 1978, my youngest daughter, Beatrice, was born. The delivery was difficult, complicated by the stress and anxiety of the past few months. But as I held that tiny baby in my arms, a new resolve began to grow inside me. I was going to raise those 4 children on my own, with dignity, and I was going to make sure that they never wanted for anything. The months that followed were a blur of work and sleeplessness. I sewed during the day while Beatrice was sleeping, and again at night after the children were in bed. The older ones helped out as much as they could. Charles Edward ran small deliveries of finished clothes. Mary Elizabeth looked after the baby while I worked. Joseph Andrew helped with chores around the house. In 1979, I filed for divorce. I didn't know where Arnold was, but his abandonment made the process easier. It was painful to have to explain everything to the lawyer, to see my story recorded in official documents, but I needed that divorce. I needed that piece of paper that said that I was free, that I could rebuild my life. The neighborhood, of course, was buzzing with gossip. Back then, being a divorced woman carried a social stigma. There were looks of pity, whispers as I walked by. Some friends distanced themselves from me, as if divorce were contagious. But others, like Louise, stayed by my side, offering support and friendship when I needed it most. It was around this time that I received an offer that would change my life. Mrs. Wilson, a loyal customer who had hired me for various sewing jobs, owned a small fabric store in the neighborhood. One day, she came to my house with a proposal. "Teresa, I'm thinking about expanding my store. I want to open a dressmaking section, but I need someone who knows the business, someone who has good taste and skilled hands. I immediately thought of you." The offer was extremely tempting. A steady salary, which was better than what I was making at the factory, plus a commission on the pieces sold. I accepted right away, seeing it as an opportunity to improve my children's lives. I worked hard at Mrs. Wilson's store during the day and continued with my extra work at night. Gradually, I started to create my own designs, simple but elegant pieces that the customers loved. Mrs. Wilson, recognizing my talent, started to give me more creative freedom. In 1980, a year after I started working at the store, I received another unexpected phone call from Celia. "Teresa, I need your help," she said, her voice filled with emotion. She told me that her shop was failing, that the debts were piling up, and that she didn't know what to do. Arnold had never contacted them, and she and Deborah were about to lose their home. I can't explain what made me do it. Maybe it was a feeling of sisterhood. Maybe it was the memory of Deborah's frightened expression from that day in Indianapolis. Maybe it was the realization that I could have easily been in her shoes. Without really thinking it through, I heard myself saying, "Come to Chicago. I know someone who needs a fabric salesperson." 2 weeks later, Celia and Deborah arrived in Chicago with a few suitcases and a lot of shattered dreams. I rented a room for them at Louise's house, who, after hearing the whole story, agreed to help. I introduced Celia to Mrs. Wilson, who was impressed with her knowledge of fabrics and her way with the customers, and hired her immediately. Deborah, who was 15, started going to the same school as my children, although they were in different grades because of their age differences. It was a very strange situation at first, this unlikely arrangement. My children, to whom I finally had to reveal the truth about their father, were confused and hurt, especially Charles Edward, who, at 13, already fully understood what his father had done. "Why are you helping them, Mom?" he asked me one day, his voice full of pain. "He abandoned us because of them." "No, honey," I replied. taking his hands in mine. Your father abandoned us because of himself, because of his own poor choices. Celia and Deborah are victims, just like us. And in this world, women need to support each other. Slowly, a strange friendship began to blossom between our families. Celia, who had initially seemed uncomfortable with my generosity, started giving back in any way that she could. She brought treats for the children, helped Mary Elizabeth with her math homework, a subject that she was very good at. She offered to babysit Beatrice when I had to work late. Deborah, after initially keeping her distance, started to bond with my children, especially Charles Edward. The two of them discovered that, in addition to their shared physical traits, they also shared a love of books and storytelling. It was both painful and heartwarming to see them together, discovering this late-blooming sibling connection. In 1981, Mrs. Wilson decided that she wanted to retire and offered to sell me the store. The price was way beyond my means, but she, who had become like a second mother to me, proposed a deal. I could pay her in monthly installments while I managed the business. That's when I had a bold idea. I called Celia to talk to her about it. What if we became partners? I proposed. You understand sales and fabrics. I understand dressmaking. Together, we can turn this store into something bigger. She looked at me, surprised and touched. You would trust me like that, Teresa? It wasn't you who lied to me, Celia. It was him who lied to both of us, and so, New Beginning Clothing was born, a name that perfectly captured our story. Celia handled the sales and administration. I managed the creation and production. At first, it was just the two of us, working from dawn to dusk, but soon the business started to grow, and we were able to hire assistants. The years went by, and the store became very successful. We moved to a larger location, hired more seamstresses, and expanded our product line. We even started to supply uniforms to some local companies, including, ironically, the same trucking company where Arnold had worked. The children all grew up. Charles Edward, who had always been a dedicated student, earned a scholarship to college and graduated with a degree in engineering. Mary Elizabeth followed in my footsteps and developed a passion for fashion, becoming a talented designer who brought fresh ideas to the business. Joseph Andrew, with his outgoing personality, naturally took over the sales department when Celia started to slow down because of age. And Beatrice, my youngest, who was born during such a difficult time, grew into a strong and determined young woman, studying law and advocating for women's rights, just like her mother. Deborah, Celia's daughter, graduated with a degree in business administration and brought a new level of professionalism to the business. She was the one who suggested that we expand into new markets, who organized our financial systems, and who guided us through complicated tax and labor laws. Life was not easy, but it was honest and fulfilling. We never heard from Arnold again. Years later, we received news that he had died in a car accident somewhere down south. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for the father of my children, anger at the man who had abandoned us, and finally, a sense of peace at having closure. When I look back at the frightened young woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal back in 1978, I barely recognize the woman that I have become. The path has been challenging, full of obstacles, but each trial has made me stronger. Each difficulty has taught me something new. That birthday card that I had found in Arnold's coat pocket could have completely destroyed my life, but instead, it became the starting point of a journey of self-discovery and resilience. The pain of betrayal transformed into the strength to rebuild not only my own life but also the lives of those around me. And most surprisingly, the woman that I had once feared the most, the woman who represented Arnold's betrayal, became my ally, my partner, and my friend. Celia and I, two women who had been betrayed by the same man, had found the strength to move forward together, proving that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as tragedies. The 1980s brought a lot of changes to America and to my life. While the country was experiencing the Reagan era and dreaming of prosperity, I was building my own path to freedom. Our store, New Beginning Clothing, grew every year, becoming a well-known name in the neighborhood. What had started as a small business that was run by two desperate women turned into a successful company that employed over 15 seamstresses and 3 salespeople. It wasn't a piece of cake. In the beginning, a lot of suppliers didn't take two divorced women very seriously. I remember one fabric representative who always insisted on speaking only to the owner when he came to the store. Celia, who was always more diplomatic than me, would smile sweetly and say, "You are talking to her." Actually, to both of the owners. In 1983, we expanded to a space that was 3 times as large, located on the main avenue of the neighborhood. We took out a bank loan, which was another huge challenge for women back then. The manager only approved it after Charles Edward, who was 18 at the time, signed as a guarantor, even though all of the assets belonged to us. That was the world that we lived in, where a man's signature was worth more than the proven track record of a company that was run by women. But we didn't let those obstacles stop us. The new store had a big window where we displayed our most beautiful creations. In the back of the store, we set up a bigger atelier with industrial machines that allowed us to take on larger orders. Before long, we were supplying uniforms for schools, businesses, and even some hospitals in the area. Mary Elizabeth, my daughter, who was 16 at the time, turned out to be a natural designer. She started sketching out simple designs for our younger customers, and before long, her creations were among the most popular in the store. Watching her talent grow was one of the greatest joys during those years. It was as if all of the sacrifices, all of the sleepless nights, all of the hard work had been worth it, just to see my children find their own paths. Charles Edward started engineering college in 1984 with a full scholarship, thanks to his exceptional academic record. I remember his graduation day in 1989 like it was yesterday, sitting in the audience between Celia and my other children. I couldn't hold back the tears as I watched him receive his diploma, looking so handsome in a suit that he had borrowed from a cousin. At that moment, I thought about Arnold, and how he had missed out on the privilege of seeing his son grow into such an admirable man. Joseph Andrew, who was always the most outgoing of my children, found his calling in sales. Ever since he was a teenager, he had helped out at the store on Saturdays, charming the customers with his natural charisma. When he turned 18 in 1989, he was already our top salesperson, with a special talent for negotiating with suppliers and winning over new clients. And Beatrice, my youngest, who had been born during that very difficult time in 1978, grew up to be a strong and determined young woman. From a very young age, she showed a keen intellect and a strong sense of justice that often surprised me. When a teacher suggested to her that she should follow in her mother's footsteps and pursue a career in sewing, Beatrice, who was only 10 years old at the time, replied that she wanted to become a lawyer to defend women like her mother, who had to fight against everything and everyone in order to survive. Deborah, Celia's daughter, graduated with a degree in business administration in 1986 and brought a fresh perspective to our business. With her expertise, we implemented a much more efficient financial control system, expanded into new product lines, and even opened a small branch in a neighboring area. She and Charles Edward collaborated on strategies for growing the company, combining engineering and administration skills to optimize our processes. It was fascinating to see how the half-siblings, who had only met when they were teenagers, had developed such a close and collaborative relationship. Deborah and Charles Edward both shared the same analytical minds, the same quiet determination. Mary Elizabeth and Deborah shared a keen sense of aesthetics, although it was expressed in different ways. one through fashion and the other through the impeccable organization of spreadsheets and reports. I can't pretend that everything was always perfect. There were difficult times, heated discussions, and contested decisions, as there always are in any family. And yes, we had become an unconventional family, united by bonds that were stronger than blood. There was the economic recession of the early 1980s, the various economic policies that turned all of our planning upside down, and the rampant inflation that made it almost impossible to put a price on our products. In 1986, during an economic downturn, we almost lost everything. Price freezes, combined with a shortage of raw materials, put us in an impossible situation. I remember a lot of sleepless nights that I spent sitting at the kitchen table with Celia and Deborah, trying to figure out a way out of the economic labyrinth that the country had gotten itself into. It was Charles Edward who suggested that we diversify into providing repair and alteration services, which could be priced by the hour rather than just by the value of the final product. Joseph Andrew found a cooperative of cotton producers in a rural area that offered us terms that allowed us to survive the price freeze. And Mary Elizabeth created a line of accessories that were made from fabric scraps that we would have otherwise thrown away, turning a potential waste product into a new source of income. Once again, instead of defeating us, adversity only made us stronger. We emerged from the economic crisis stronger, more diversified, and more united as a family and as a company. In 1990, when the country entered another recession, we faced yet another crisis. We had been saving up for years to buy a larger property for the store, and all of a sudden, a large portion of that money became inaccessible. There were months of hardship, reorganization, and even more intense work. It was during this time that Celia started to show the first signs of fatigue. Being a few years older than me, she was already in her 50s, and the stress from the previous years had taken a toll on her. It started with very minor things: frequent headaches, loss of appetite, and fatigue that she couldn't seem to shake off. After that, she needed to be put to rest. In early 1991, we were hit with a diagnosis that just flattened us: breast cancer, and it was already in an advanced stage. Celia had been ignoring the symptoms, way too busy running the business, making sure Deborah would be okay in the future. The next few months were like being on a non-stop emotional roller coaster: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. Some days were good, some were unbelievably terrible. Deborah, just crushed at the thought of losing her mom, somehow found the strength to keep managing the store while I went with Celia to all her treatments. It was a weird kind of full circle, you know? Here I was, taking care of the woman I used to think of as my rival, the other woman in my husband's life, holding her hand during chemo, helping her eat when she was too weak to even lift a spoon, reading to her when she couldn't focus on the words. One afternoon at the hospital, while we were waiting for the doctor, Celia grabbed my hand and said something I'll never forget. "You know, Teresa, when you showed up at that shop in Indianapolis, I thought it was the worst day of my life. But now, looking back, I think it was the best. That day freed me from a life of lies and brought me you, the best friend I've ever had." I couldn't say anything. I was just too choked up. I just squeezed her hand real tight, and she felt it, and she knew that she understood everything I couldn't say. Celia fought like hell for 4 years. She'd have periods where she was in remission, and she'd come back to work part-time at the store, always wearing a bright scarf to cover her bald head. Then she'd relapse and be back in the hospital for weeks. In 1995, on Deborah's 30th birthday, she passed away peacefully in her bed, holding my hand on one side and her daughter's on the other. The grief was so deep, not just for Deborah, but for all of us. Celia had become the heart of our strange, unconventional family. Losing her left a hole that seemed impossible to fill. The store, even though Deborah and my kids were doing a great job running it, just didn't feel as alive without her. It was during that time of mourning that I made a decision that took everyone by surprise. I used my savings and got a loan with Charles Edward's help, and I bought a bigger house, enough room for all of us, me, my 4 kids, and Deborah, if she wanted to join us. I remember the look on her face when I asked her. A mix of shock, emotion, and a little bit of hesitation. Are you sure, Teresa? Wouldn't that be kind of weird for your kids? My kids have considered you family for years, Deborah, and so do I. Your mother was like a sister to me, and you're like a daughter. Our family's never been normal anyway. She said yes, and that's how we started a new chapter. The new house wasn't fancy, but it was big and welcoming. Everyone had their own room, and there was even space for a sewing room where I could still create things, even though I wasn't spending as much time at the store. Charles Edward married Anna, a colleague from the engineering firm where he worked, in 1996. The next year, my first grandchild, Gabriel, was born. Holding him in my arms for the first time was something I can't even describe. Looking at that perfect little face, I thought about everything that had led me to that moment. The birthday card in Arnold's pocket, the discovery in Indianapolis, the years of struggling to rebuild my life, the unlikely friendship with Celia, the store growing, all the problems we'd overcome. Every tough time, every tear, every late night had been worth it to get to that moment. That pivotal moment, to see my family happy, successful, connected in a way I never thought possible. Mary Elizabeth, in 98. She aced her fashion design degree and just took charge of the store's creative vision. Her unique style took our designs to a whole new level, attracting all sorts of new customers and putting our name on the map way beyond our little neighborhood. Joseph Andrew, he got married young, at 23, to his high school sweetheart, and boom, 2 kids right away. Even with all the young family stuff, he was always involved in the business, became our commercial director, and basically handled all the supplier and corporate client deals. Beatrice, my baby, she finished law school in 99. And even though she started her own practice, she always found time to handle the legal side of our company, making sure we were in the clear with all the labor and tax stuff. And Deborah, who at first thought she'd climb the corporate ladder, she stayed with the family business, stepped into her mother's shoes, and then some. Under her leadership, we opened 2 more stores by the end of the 90s, turning that little clothing store that started in tough times into a respected chain in the local scene. As the new millennium was approaching, I looked back and could hardly believe how my life had changed. From that young, naive woman who trusted her husband completely to a businesswoman that people looked up to, who'd raised 4 kids who were good people. From the woman who was betrayed and abandoned to the matriarch of a family that wasn't exactly traditional, but was closer than anything. The scars were still there. Sure, there were times when the betrayal still stung, when not having Celia around still felt heavy, when I felt like I was about to break from years of fighting. But those scars had become like badges of honor. Quiet reminders of how I'd pushed through, started over, turned hurt into hustle. Like my mama used to say, God works in mysterious ways. That Saturday in Indianapolis that felt like the end of the world actually ended up being the beginning of a life that felt more real, more full, and surprisingly happier than I ever thought it could be. The new millennium arrived, changing everything, and giving me a lot to think about. At 76, looking back, I saw a life I never could have imagined when I was that scared 19-year-old in 78, finding out about my husband's double life. The year 2000 was a big one for our family. We threw a party to celebrate 20 years of New Beginning clothing, and we had everyone there, old employees, new employees, customers who'd been with us forever, suppliers who were practically family, and of course, our wonderfully weird family. I remember standing on that little makeshift stage, looking out at all those smiling faces, and feeling so grateful I could barely speak. Deborah was right there, holding my hand, like she knew exactly what I was feeling. The daughter life gave me, not through blood, but through a twist of fate that turned something awful into something amazing. I swear, I felt Celia's spirit, like she was right there smiling with that warm smile she kept even when things were at their worst. We started as two broken women. I finally managed to say, with kids to raise and hearts that were shattered. We didn't have much besides our own two hands, our grit, and a knack for sewing. And look at us now. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't sad tears. They were tears of gratitude for the journey, for the lives that had been transformed, for the legacy we were building. The business kept growing in the years that followed. In '02, we expanded into corporate uniforms, which was a more stable market that kept us going when the economy was shaky. In '05, Mary Elizabeth launched our first affordable party dress line, which was a huge hit with women who wanted to look stylish without spending a fortune. But more than just the business success, what really made me proud was seeing how my kids, including Deborah, had grown into such good, caring, and strong people. Charles Edward, my oldest, became a respected engineer, working on projects to improve the lives of people in underserved communities. In '03, he led an initiative to bring solar power to a settlement on the edge of the city. When people asked him where he got his passion for helping others, he'd say, "I learned from my mom that hard times can be stepping stones, not roadblocks." Mary Elizabeth turned her fashion talent into a way to uplift other women. Besides her work at the company, in '06, she started a program to teach sewing to women who were struggling, a lot of them survivors of domestic violence. My mom rebuilt her life with a needle and thread, she'd tell her students. You can too. Joseph Andrew, always the most outgoing, became the face of our company. He's the one who negotiated our first big international deal in '08 with a European brand that wanted to do ethical manufacturing in the States. His natural charm opened doors, but it was his honesty that kept them open. "I learned from my mom that your word is the most valuable thing you have," he always said. Beatrice, my youngest, who was born right in the middle of the storm, became a lawyer dedicated to helping women. In '04, she opened a firm specializing in family law, helping women in situations like the one I went through decades ago. I grew up watching my mom fight against a system that wasn't set up for a divorced woman with 4 kids, she explained. "I want to make sure other women have the legal support she didn't have." And Deborah, who grew up carrying the secret of being the other daughter, turned into a smart businesswoman and a generous philanthropist. In '07, she set up a foundation in her mother Celia's name, giving scholarships to kids from single-parent homes. "My mother and Teresa taught me that family isn't about blood or paperwork," she'd say at the scholarship ceremonies. "It's about love, about caring, about being there when things get tough." Then the grandkids started arriving, filling up my house and my heart. By 2010, there were 8 of them. 4 from Charles Edward, 2 from Joseph Andrew, 1 from Mary Elizabeth, and 1 from Beatrice. Watching them grow up, playing together on family Sundays, not even knowing the crazy story of how their families all came together, was one of the best things in my life. In 2012, when I was 63, I decided to step back from the company. My kids and Deborah were running things like pros, and I felt like I needed to take some time for myself, take care of my health, which was starting to show some wear and tear, and enjoy my grandkids. It wasn't a full retirement. I still went to the store a few days a week, still made special pieces for some of my old customers, still weighed in on the big decisions, but now I had time for the little things that made me happy. Teaching the grandkids how to sew, tending to a little herb garden on the porch, joining a book club at the local library. It was during that quieter time that I really started thinking about my life and what I wanted to leave behind. Not just the stuff, the company, the house, the money to make sure my kids and grandkids were comfortable, but the values, the lessons I'd learned, the wisdom I'd gained from all the pain and overcoming. In 2015, I was asked to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. I was a nervous wreck. I'd never been one for public speaking, always preferred working quietly with my hands, creating things with fabric. But Beatrice insisted, said my story could inspire other women. I'm no speaker, I argued. And I don't have the fancy education to talk to a bunch of college grads. Mom, Beatrice replied, with that stubbornness she got from me. You have something way more valuable than any diploma. You've lived it. Your story is powerful. So I gave in and said yes. And to my surprise, that talk opened up a whole new chapter in my life. Other women, a lot of them younger than me, wanted to hear how I'd turned betrayal into strength, how I'd built a business from scratch, how I'd raised 4 kids on my own back when being a single mom was almost a scandal. The secret, I'd tell them, isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time life knocks you down. And if you can, help someone else up too. In 2018, when I was 69, we hit another big milestone. Our company merged with a national fashion brand. It wasn't a buyout, but a partnership that let New Beginning Clothing expand to other cities while keeping its values and its soul. The one thing we insisted on was that Mary Elizabeth's policy of hiring women who needed a second chance would stay in place and even grow. Signing that deal with all my kids and Deborah standing beside me felt like things had come full circle. From that little living room that turned into a makeshift workshop to a company that was now going national. It had been a long and wild ride. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, we faced a whole new set of problems. With stores shut down and orders for uniforms drying up, we had to reinvent ourselves all over again. It was Joseph Andrew who suggested we finally move to online sales, something we'd resisted for years because we liked having that personal connection with our customers. The pandemic also brought us back to our roots. We started making masks, first to donate to hospitals and underserved communities, then as a new product line. The whole family pitched in. Even I, at 71, was back at the sewing machine every day, remembering those early days when every single piece I made was crucial to putting food on the table. Now, here we are in 2025, and I look back and see a life that, despite all the heartache, has been full of meaning and purpose. I never got remarried. There were a few relationships over the years, good men who brought some companionship and love into my life, but I never felt the need to make anything official. My family, my kids, Deborah, my grandkids, and the ever-present memory of Celia, filled my heart in a way that no romance ever could. Arnold remains this distant, almost mythical figure in our family's story. When the grandkids got older and started asking about the grandfather they never knew, we told them the truth in a way that was right for their age, not to keep the bitterness alive, but to honor the journey that got us here. Your grandfather made mistakes that hurt a lot of people, I'd explain. But without those mistakes, our family wouldn't be what it is today. You wouldn't have so many aunts, uncles, and cousins. And I wouldn't have found the strength I didn't even know I had. It's strange to think that I owe some gratitude to the man who broke my heart. Not for leaving, of course, or for the lies, but for being the spark that lit the fire in my life. Without that birthday card I found in his coat pocket, without that desperate trip to Indianapolis, without that painful confrontation, I might have lived my whole life in the shadows, settling for less than I deserved, never finding out what I was really capable of. At 76, sitting on the porch of the house I built with my own 2 hands, surrounded by pictures of my kids and grandkids, with Celia's memory always there in the little things, I feel a peace that seemed impossible on that day in 1978. The wrinkles on my face tell the story of so many smiles, so many tears, so many sleepless nights, so many celebrations. My hands, now a little shaky with age but still skilled enough to teach my 5-year-old great-granddaughter how to make her first stitches, Hold the memory of every piece I've sewn, every fabric I've cut, every button I've fastened. These hands fed my children, wiped away their tears, built a business, and offered support to other women who were hurting. If I could go back in time and talk to that young Teresa, scared and betrayed, I would say, the road ahead is going to be hard. There will be days when you want to give up, but you are stronger than you think. This pain, which feels like it will never end, will be turned into something beautiful. And one day, years from now, you will look back and realize that this terrible moment was actually the start of your real life. The biggest lesson I've learned, and the one I try to pass on to my kids, grandkids, and now great-grandkids, is that our stories aren't about the blows we take, but about how we respond to them. That sometimes we need to be broken down to discover what we're made of. That the brightest light can come from the deepest cracks. That birthday card I found in Arnold's coat pocket could have been the end of my story. Instead, it was just the first chapter of a saga of resilience, reinvention, and unconditional love. A saga that continues to unfold through the generations I helped create and inspire. And maybe that's the most valuable thing I can leave behind. Not the store, not the money, not even the family name, but the certainty that it's possible to turn the greatest pain into a greater purpose. That it's possible to lose everything and still build something even more beautiful than what was there before. That in the end, it's possible to turn betrayal into triumph. As I tell my grandkids, life rarely goes the way we plan. The trick isn't to fight the unexpected turns, but to learn to navigate them with grace and courage. And always remember that in the darkest moments, when everything seems lost, that's exactly when the biggest opportunities for growth and change are born. And you, my dear viewers watching me now, remember, whatever you're going through, whatever challenges you're facing, there's always a way forward. Sometimes we just need the courage to take that first step, even if our legs are shaking and our heart is broken. The rest, as I found out on that trip to Indianapolis all those years ago, the path will reveal itself. If you liked this story, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary. It helps me a lot to continue sharing my experiences with you. Also, leave in the comments where you're watching from and if any part of my story touched your heart in a special way. Share it with someone who might be needing hope today. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me with such kindness.